Hi, this is Doug Vogt from the Dial Foundation again. This video series 7 is on an 11th code system that Moses didn't know about, and I found it by accident. I call it God's code system. You should watch video series 6, A and B, part 1 and 2. That goes into the 10 code systems that Moses had created. Some of them in 6b deal with the number 12,068, which is the number of years between the polar reversals. That number will be important for this series, so you should understand how I found it and what that is. But the two books I'm going to go over is Chapter 11 in Moses' 10 Code Systems, the latest book. And this one I wrote now approaching 11 years ago. It's chapter 11. This was the 11th was the scariest chapter in the book. And the reason is, it's one thing when you theorize there's a God and you take it on faith. It's another when you actually see what he does to make sure events happen when he wants them. And inevitably, we're dealing with how much free will do we really have with this part 1 or part A, and then part B definitely. And it's that's why I think it was the most scariest part of the book. I mentioned this picture. I used this picture in video series 1, part 2 on the clock cycle. How do this couple just got married? And how do they know they're in a created reality? More importantly, how does the creator, the operating system of this universe, tell man that he exists? And the way he does it, evidently, is with cycles that run through time that shouldn't logically be there. And that's what you have to look for. And that's what I found with what I'm covering here. Not just the physical evidence of the 6 blank periods I found in space. 4 of the 6 were 12,068 light years apart, or the Gleisberg cycle, which is our sun. 8 sunspot maximums is called a Gleisberg cycle. And the last one, this is important for what you're about to see. The maximum was roughly December of 57. There was like 355 sunspots in one day. That's a lot. The sun went nuts. There was a journal article I remember seeing. It said, "Is our model of the sun correct?" And it turned out it's not. But this is important. The next Gleisberg cycle will be between September and December 2046, because it's 88.73 years every cycle. 136 Gleisberg cycles is our magic number 12,068. So between September and December is when the next Gleisberg cycle is going to be. The reason why it's between these two dates is it's one thing when it's the maximum number of sunspots, but what's also important is the area of the sunspots. And that happens roughly about 3 months later. Okay, how did I find this thing? Well, I'm going to tell you the whole sequence of what happened. This happened back in 1994. The verse in Genesis where the first time the Torah mentions anything, it's the most important. So the first time it mentions month and days is the story about Noah. It says, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, basically the skies opened up and the cataclysm happened. It's all coded. These are all coded numbers. Like I mentioned in video series 6, part 2 or B, Noah's told their world is going to be destroyed when he's 500 years old, times the length of the sacred cubit, 24.136, gives you our 12,068 number. At 600 years old, the thing happens. 600 times, again, the 24.136 gives you that divided by 12 gives you the 12,068 number. Forget the decimal point. It's the sequence of numbers that's the important message. So I had a tentative date of a month and date, and I knew the end of the first month of the Jewish calendar, the way I calculated it, was September 30th, 2046. That means the 17th day of the second month would be October 16, 2046. Now, you first must say, okay, God tells us second month, the 17th day. Do we care about a month and a day of something that happened 11 or 12,000 years ago? No, we want to know the year. That's the important part. But he does tell us the year. You have to look again. This funny little verse that he's got in this, Deuteronomy 32:7. Remember the days of old, consider the years of many generations. The two genealogies that I covered in video 6b, part 2. And so this is how it turned out. Again, the two genealogies, when you take it from Adam when he had his third son, and all the rest are their first son, and you total it, and look what number we got here. 2046. How do you like that? Gee, where did I see that number before? In other words, encoded in the Torah is the exact month, the day, and the year for the next polar reversal. So, when I wrote God's Day of Judgment, this was done in 97, 98, I thought, okay, maybe let's see what happens if I go back. Let me cover how I discovered the thing. I was born September 2nd, 1947. So naturally, when you come up with a date, October 16, 2046, you say, okay, how old am I going to be when this thing happens? Tentative date. And it turned out I'm like 99.12 years old. And I remember distinctly, I was laying in bed reading this stuff in 1994, and I can't remember what month it was. Maybe I got it listed someplace. And I said, a thought floated in my head, convert it to days. So I converted it to days, and it turned out to be exactly 36,204 days, or 3 times 12,068. Kind of threw me, honestly, for about a week or 2 weeks. I want to think, this is 3 years before I found the real Mount Sinai and did that expedition. So I always said, what's going on here? What is happening here? So after about 2 or 3 weeks, 2 weeks, I said, okay, maybe he's trying to tell me something. So I created a table, and I used October 16, 2046 as the drop dead date, excuse the expression, and I went back every 12,068 days to see what happens. Well, the first cycle would have been October 1, 2013, but it hadn't happened yet when I wrote God's Day of Judgment. But I knew it was important, and I left it in the table. It's all in chapter 13 there. The second, so thanks to Barack Obama, our first Muslim, Kenyan, a communist president, he hated Israel. He really hates Jews too. So he was supposed to have given his speech the week before, October 1, the week before. But Obama forced him to change the date, and so he had to see him the week before he went to the UN. So he winds up giving the speech October 1, 2013. I'll get on this side. Unbeknownst to Obama, who hated Israel and still does, he fulfilled Bible prophecy the way God wanted him. So Netanyahu would give his speech on the day God wanted him to. Interesting. Okay, so I created a big table going all the way back in time. I'm limited by how much is actually recorded, what date something really happened. Earlier stuff is okay. later on, you're really not sure unless they publish something with the month and day, but the year is pretty good. So, 12,068 days back, Netanyahu gives a speech at the UN, like I said. 2 cycles back, or 24,136 days, the Iran-Iraq war started. We're still suffering from that. We still have that problem. Also, the same day, Libya attacked a U.S. Plane in the Mediterranean, and we turned around and Reagan bombed the hell out of him and killed his wife or killed his kids or whatever, and he got the message. 3 cycles back, I was born. 4 cycles back, this is an important one. Woodrow Wilson gives his neutrality speech in front of the Senate a few weeks after World War I started. He gives the speech August 19th. World War I started August 8th or 9th, depending on who's shooting first. And that's really important. During this war, remember, the British, the Balfour Doctrine, promised to create a Jewish state west of the Jordan River. They later reneged, and you'll find out in part 2 what happened to them, because they reneged. 4.25 cycles back. Oh yeah, you can go half cycles, quarter cycles. May 1906. This is a treaty between the British and the Ottoman Empire determining the border that we currently now have, that big long straight border from Eilat up to Gaza. That was settled then, that day. El Arish, Wadi El Arish, would have been on the Israeli side, and if it was, it made life much easier for me. 5 cycles back, the Boers signed a convention at Pretoria, Transvaal, little war in South Africa. 6 cycles back, first women's rights convention in Seneca, New York. What's interesting, 300 women attended. Again, that number 300 distills down to, was it 6,034, multiplied by 24.136. So God wanted the women to have the voting right. It's only fair. 6.5 cycles back, the Jews of Canada were accorded political equal rights. But 1832, and we did it in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. What took the Canadians so long? Oh, that's right. The Church of England, the Anglican Church, didn't believe it. They thought, with substitution theology, they thought there were the missing Jewish tribes. 7 cycles back, Barbary, remember the Barbary pirates? So a treaty was made in Algiers between the Europeans and the United States and the Barbary pirates. In France, this is important. This is the actual date that the British Army and the Napoleon's army had a peace treaty, ceasefire. That was really the end of that Napoleonic Wars right there, that date. 7.5 cycles back, the first Jewish censor appointed by the Russian government. And they had to censor all Hebrew books and stuff like that. Russians in the Russian Orthodox Church, lovely people. The turn of the 19th century, they decided to murder a third, convert a third, and deport a third. They haven't changed much. I guess they haven't learned. The certain day, also this date or this month, Napoleon decides to invade Palestine in his position in Egypt. And during this period of time, he winds up proclaiming he was going to create a Jewish state in Palestine for them. Wanted to get the Jewish vote, I guess. 8 cycles back, Congress adopted Charles Thompson's design for the Great Seal. Interesting story about that, of the eagle and the way they arranged the stars. The reason why they arranged the stars in the shape of a Jewish star, Star of David, is because George Washington insisted on it, because of Hiram Solomon loaned money, $600,000 of his own money, when a dollar was really worth a dollar, and also I think it was $2.5 or $3.5 million from Jewish merchants in Baghdad. And they're the ones who bailed the Continental Army out of the problem at Valley Forge. And that's the reason why we won the wars, because Jewish money made sure it happened. So when those say it was an act of God, they're not kidding. This is the date it happened. 9 cycles back, Spain they didn't like the gypsies. They locked them all up and put them in mercury mines. Lovely folks. 11 cycles back, 1883, Pope Innocent XII. Whenever the guy's name is Innocent, you know he's anything but. Extended laws to abolishing Jewish loan banks from Rome and other Italy. The authority had in the Jewish ghettos, prohibiting shopkeeping in most trades and crafts. The Roman Jewish community shrinks naturally, and they go to northern Italy in Venice, and they enter commerce and industry, and they also did a lot of trading. That's why Venice became very rich. 1863, during the siege of Vienna, the Ottoman Empire was attacking Vienna, almost took it over, but Simon Wiesenmeyer and Samuel Oppenheimer, same Oppenheimer from, same guy, same family. The Jewish Military Court provided the financing for the Austrian army to defeat the Muslims in Austria. The other part I have to add, the Polish king also provided an army, as well as the Prussians also, and they defeated the Muslims handily. 12 cycles back, Charles II defeated at the Battle of Dunbar by Oliver Cromwell. Oliver Cromwell later let the Jews back into England in 1655. This is an important one for the United States, the 14 cycles back. The one who originally had the charter to develop the New World for the British was Humphrey Gilbert, but he didn't do anything with it. So Sir Walter Raleigh, Raleigh, North Carolina, he bought it. The agreement they made was actually on the 23rd, and they signed the agreement on the 25th. But that was the thing that eventually created the colonies and the United States. So, again, an act of God. 15 cycles back, Grand Duke of Tuscany issued a charter. They wanted the Sephardic Jews to come in so they could do business. Basically, that was it, and they did. In Pisa, that's why Northern Italy became rich, because of Jewish merchants who were trading all over the world. 60 cycles back, February 2nd. This is important for Northern Europe and the Protestant Reformation. Pope Louis X ordered the Augustan order to discipline Martin Luther for his writings. And many of the scholars said towards the end of February, he crystallized what he was going to do. And I guess it's probably the 23rd of February. And that was the beginning of the Protestant Reformation and the weakening of the Catholic Church stranglehold on Northern Europe. Uh, 17 cycles back, Henry VIII's reign begins, and that was the War of the Roses. Eventually, because of Henry VIII, his descendant, the Church of England, and again reducing the importance of the Catholic Church in England. And eventually they actually formally let the Jews into England again. Also in 1485, Columbus sent his first proposal to the King of Portugal to explore the New World. Sometime in 1485, it may have been as early as this. Also, it's well acknowledged that Columbus and a good chunk of his crew were Jewish. We know that for a fact because his navigation records were all written in Hebrew. That means the captain had to have also been able to read it too. Also, they sailed the very day of the Spanish Inquisition of 1492. So probably most of his crew, if not all of it, was all Jewish. They wanted to leave town fast. 18 cycles back. This is an interesting one. Book production started for the Gutenberg Bible, the very first book. On that day, act of God. Interesting? 19 cycles back, the 100 Years' War started. I guess they had nothing better to do. Also, Henry V of England, which took over Normandy, made a part of England. 21 cycles back, Pope Innocent VI, you know he's not innocent, started persecuting the Jews. 26 cycles back, Saladin took Jerusalem from the Christians. The Muslims were on the move. Let me see what's important. 50 cycles back, Rome split into two empires. The Byzantine ruled Jerusalem, or Palestine. 52 and a half cycles back, Constantine conquered Italy and secured his realm as emperor. He began to promote Christianity then. It was 312. 58 cycles back, the Roman Emperor Hadrian changed the name of Jerusalem to Alesia Capitolina. Pretty name. Now we get more interesting stuff as we get older. Year 80, it would have been October 22nd, Colosseum is opened in Rome. It was built from the money that a certain Roman family and the Romans looted from the temple and anybody else they could steal. And they built it, and then they estimate over 1 million Jews to Rome for gladiatorial combat or just mass slaughter. It wasn't the Christians that were being persecuted in the Colosseum, it was the Jews. 67 cycles back, Maccabean revolt against the Greeks. 2 envoys from Jewish Maccabees were the first Jews to travel to Rome. 72 cycles back, Alexander the Great captured Jerusalem on that date. 78 cycles back, 529, King Cyrus dies, and the first group of Jews start returning back to Judea. 80 cycles back, the first time Jerusalem fell to the Babylonians. 89.5 cycles back, Solomon's temple was plundered by Pharaoh Shashuk. 92 and a half cycles back, estimated date when David became uncontested king after Saul's death. This is the end of it. 101 and a half cycles back, this is how I knew the date of the actual Exodus. 1306 BCE, October 21, that was the date for the Battle of Amalek in Rephidim. And when I go through volume 3, I have all the dates perfectly described and corresponding with what Moses has in the book Exodus. Perfectly. To the day. Other way to try, 104 cycles back, Aaron was born. Remember, he's 83 years old at the time of the Exodus. Do the math. That from that gives you 83 years old. 105.5 cycles back, Tutmosis III died. His wife was, remember, Joseph's daughter through Hatshepsut. 11 of the 12 tribes were enslaved within 1 year. Actually, it may have been 2 years, but around there. And keep in mind, Tutmosis III's son was Joseph's grandson, and he's the one who enslaved 11 of the 12 tribes. Only 10 tribes got out of that period of enslavement. Joseph's 2 sons and Joseph were not slaves. Remember, he was married. Hatshepsut's daughter, the Pharaoh's daughter, she freed him beforehand. 101 cycles back, Joseph became prime minister. 1488 BCE, works out perfect. 111 cycles back, Abraham was to sacrifice Isaac on Mount Sinai. Abraham's contract with God began at this date. Interesting. This is an estimated date for Terah's, Abraham's father's birth, 116.5 cycles back. Can't make this stuff up. The stuff I'm going to cover in the next one, I'm going to give you a sampling of it. Maybe I'll get on this side. 1606 BCE, from Isaac to the Exodus. I estimate Isaac was born in 1606 BCE. Exodus occurred in September of 1306 BCE. The difference is 300 years. 300 times the 24.136 gives you that, divided by the divide symbols going from word to here, chops it out. it's a division symbol. By 12 gives you 6,034. Ignore the decimal point. This one was kind of personal also. Kind of interesting. It has to do with the Exodus and where Moses was. Now, the story is he goes graze his sheep. You have to know that all sheep, lambs are born in March and some in April in the northern hemisphere. You have to know that. It takes 45 days for them to gain enough weight and get to about 15 pounds, and they're weaned from their mother. The verse during the Exodus story where it says, you can't take a lamb from its mother's milk, that's not the Fleischedick laws. No, don't mix meat with dairy. It's to tell you the season of the year that the Exodus happened. Now, if it happened in March, which the current month of Nisan says, then it takes 45 days. If they're all born in March, you wouldn't have a lamb to sacrifice until about middle of May. That means it couldn't happen in March and April. But if it happens in September, this problem disappears. Then they're all lambs of the first year, and they're already weaned. Keep that in mind. That thing, by the way, is mentioned 3 times about that, and also age of 120 years. To give you a clue. Anyway, so the first plague was when the Pharaoh blesses the flood waters of the Nile. That happens on the summer solstice, which is June 21st, 1306 BCE. So Moses and Aaron were there. But 3 months beforehand, he had to have been at the hill. And that's probably roughly when he went into the cave, really deep in the cave, and he must have found the burning bush stuff, a hologram basically, and got the rod out and things like that. So, from the time he was there in March 25th, 1306 BCE, and when we were there, the first expedition, November 29th, was the first day of the expedition. We were there for about a week. That's exactly 1,206,800 days, or the 12,068 number with a couple of zeros after it. It's exactly the 12,068 with a couple of zeros. I didn't plan it that way. In fact, when I noticed the pattern you saw there, I let the Egyptians determine the date that Vic and I were going to be at the expedition on this date. They decided it. And it was this is exactly 50 years. It was actually came out to the hour of when the UN voted to create the State of Israel. But exact. I didn't plan it. But once I recognized the pattern, to see if it was true, I let the Egyptians pick the date that I was going to be there. The next part 2 of this thing will be on these kind of patterns, which is maybe more scary. We're going to have a discussion about free will. There's really a question we all are going to have to ask ourselves. How much free will have we really been given? Because I'm not too sure anymore after discovering this stuff and what you're going to see in the next one. Dihole Foundation is a 501c3. The reason you now know why we went from a science foundation, but also it blended into studying the Torah, is because what we found in it and what I just showed you, this is a scientific problem besides a philosophical one and a religious one. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something, and the next video hopefully won't be too scary for you.